Hi, and welcome to Section 10 on Best Practices in Hydration for Peak Performance. I'm Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian with My Sports Dietitian. In this section, we'll focus on really what's the role nutrition, but hydration specifically, plays on peak performance. First, let's talk about the facts and functions of water. Our body is about 75% water, and it has several different functions. Number one, it lubricates our body, especially connective tissue, and that helps increase our mobility and also increase our range of motion. So if we're in a dehydrated state, it makes it a lot difficult for our muscle and our joints to function as efficiently. It also assists our body in thermoregulation via sweat. So it keeps our body cool, especially when we're training in hot and humid environments. It acts as a medium to where we can have nutrients distribute to working muscles. So as our body is working harder, hydration plays a key role in keeping those muscles functioning accurately and correctly. It also gets rid of waste and toxins from our muscles and organs, so it helps excrete a lot of external waste. And finally, it helps transport oxygen to those muscles, which breaks down energy for fuel. So what happens if we're dehydration, or what goes on during the dehydration process? Number one, we're starving our muscles from what they need to perform. So not having enough fluid into our cells, particularly into our muscle tissue, it also helps with glycogen repair. This starts really increasing or starting the beginning stages of fatigue. And the first sign of fatigue is typically due to dehydration. Now, that's usually due to a lack of hydrating our body. And what causes that? So what causes some of our athletes today to underhydrate? Number one, a lot of sweat, intense workouts, and long workouts. So when you combine long, intense workouts, especially if you're doing that in a hot and humid environment, then that's going to increase the volume of sweat. We do have some athletes that sweat more than others, and those we have to really be cautious about because their sweat rates probably are going to exceed their fluid intake rates, and that could be of concern. Temperature. So depending on where you train, obviously wrestling and wrestlers train inside. If you have an outside day where you may be doing some cross training or some actually endurance training, just be aware of your humid and hot conditions, because this also creates the lack of desire to drink because of the way the athlete will feel. So combining of training in a very hot environment, humid environment, with lack of hydrating could cause some problems, and we'll talk about those shortly. Also, heavy workouts in cold weather. So just because it gets cold and you may not be sweating as much as you would in a hot environment, particularly if you're wearing extra clothing and maybe running outside, this is not another reason why we do underhydrate, is because we don't think that we're sweating as much and losing as much fluid, but in reality we are. All right, so what are some of the signs of dehydration? As I mentioned in the previous slide, the first sign is fatigue. And not only is it fatigue, but it's also a decrease in performance. And it starts as little as 2% of body weight. So if that athlete's 150 pounds and they lose three pounds in a practice, or they're 3 pounds lost midway through practice, they're going to start getting tired. That's common. It's where we're getting into the 4%, the 5% loss, where we have some health issues we have to be cautious about. This is a 200-pound athlete. It's about a 4-pound weight loss. Obviously, coaches and athletes are not weighing themselves during practice. I've rarely heard of those incidents ever happening. But it is something where an athlete may want to know what their weight is going into practice, because you don't want to go in 2 to 3% dehydrated and then practice for several hours. Headaches. You have to be cautious in monitoring this. This usually occurs after an intense training session. Usually it happens with a couple of reasons. Number one, a low fluid intake plus high sweat rate, and that's just usually due to dehydration and not consuming enough fluids. But if an athlete is drinking a lot of water during a long training session, this is called exercise-associated hyponatremia, a low sodium level in the blood. This is very dangerous. So if you notice an athlete constantly drinking and they start having headaches, you need to pull them from practice as soon as possible. This could eventually lead to a major electrolyte imbalance, cardiac arrhythmias, and possibly some serious health issues. So look for some of those signs: dizziness, irritability, mood. These are all things that would indicate there's probably some major issues going on. What are some other signs? So let's really look at the upper body first. top left-hand corner, thirsty. So if an athlete has a dry mouth and they're thirsty, they need a drink. We don't want to keep pushing them past those limits because it's only going to lead to more issues. Again, dizziness, moodiness, irritability. That's the sign that maybe some more things are going on in the body, and we need to address those pretty quickly before it can get out of hand and cause maybe a major medical side effect. We'll go to the lower end of the body. When we get to the kidneys, first thing is really just low urine output. So an athlete is sweating a lot. They don't have a lot of urine left. They're not consuming a lot, so they're not going to really go to the restroom that often. And really, when we start looking at our urine, like it is in the morning, it's dark. That's a sign of pretty bad dehydration. In the stomach area, after a practice, we could see some nausea. We could see some stomach cramps. And from a neuromuscular side, we could see neuromuscular cramps. And that could be due to electrolyte imbalance. It could be due to nerves, lack of mobility, lack of training. There are so many causes and reasons that an athlete may have muscle cramps. It's not just lack of potassium or lack of sodium. There are multiple factors that are being studied. And we're still a little bit somewhat unsure. But, number one is we just want to make sure that athlete is hydrated as possible. As Clint mentioned in section 5 of this series, we talked about weight cutting. And he went into detail about fluid shifts and really what's the best way to do that from a fluid standpoint. All right, so how do we determine how well hydrated your athletes are? We really want them to be in these first 3 areas. We want them to be hydrated. We want to have maybe light to mild, yellow urine, but mostly light colored. Clear to light as best as possible. That's that targeted area. Where we look at or start seeing some really serious health implications that occur and some complications is where we get from 6 to 8, that dark yellow to really brown color. That's not good. We want to avoid that. I can understand in the morning if an athlete is maybe dehydrated and trying to cut and watch, and then they weigh in, and then we have to rehydrate and hyperhydrate. At the same time, we don't want to go into practice in a 4 or 5 stage. We want to go in hydrated, and then if we come out a little dehydrated, I understand that, but we don't want to ever get into that 6 to 8 stage to where it could negatively impact our health and cause some serious health complications. All right, so how can you as a coach or an athletic trainer or even an athlete assess your hydration status? Number one, let's talk about the morning. Really what I've seen, this comes from Dr. Stacy Sims and her work with hydration, but looking at what? Weight, urine, and thirst. So when we wake up, we want to make sure our body weight's within 1% of our normal weight. That's a good way to indicate, are we on track? Urine's usually going to be dark in the morning, and that's common because we're sleeping. We haven't had fluids in maybe 8 to 10 hours. That's okay. That's normal. Start hydrating. And usually we're thirsty. So these are some common things that we're going to see in the morning. During the day, we want to start looking at urine color. So if you need to add a sports drink, if your urine is dark, just a way to get some sodium or salty foods, that way we can hold on to fluids in the body, we need to do that. It could be just a low-carbohydrate electric drink like a Propel or like a Powerade Zero or one of those options that don't have a lot of calories and carbohydrate but also have some extra electrolytes. It's also important to have some sodium to keep that fluid balance. So if you want to have some salty crackers or add a little salt to your meal or vegetables, especially maybe adding it to like fruit, like a watermelon, that's great because you got great hydration and great fluid in that fruit. Also, the salt will help retain that. Pre-training, kind of just mentioned this, but going into your training session, this is the great way, this is the best really place to where we can get a little bit of fluid in our system and hold it into our cells. Again, maybe some type of salted watery fruits, add salt to watermelon or apple, even like something like a tomato or a vegetable that has a lot of water content. I like to maybe add salt and honey to water and even squeeze a little lemon in there and kind of make your own little hydration sports drink. And get a little sugar for energy. It gives you a little booster in your training session. During your training, sip on fluids throughout practice, maybe 8 to 12 ounces every 20 to 30 minutes. If you need to do a little bit less, like 6, that's fine. You just want to drink something. You don't want to go through a complete practice on no fluids. And I know athletes do that. I've seen tons of wrestlers that have tried that practice, and it usually doesn't work out well for them in the long run. Some may have had success. Post-training, this is where we really want to start rehydrating. You want your urine clear about 2 to 3 hours after your workout. You want to have some protein and carbs to replace the energy stores. And that may be in a smoothie content or a smoothie form. So it can be liquid if needed. If you don't have the desire to eat solid food, we just want to start replacing that gas tank, repair the muscle tissue, and also get rehydrated. We usually recommend, some type of low-carb electrolyte drink. I mentioned Propel earlier. I mentioned Powerade Zero. You can use Scratch Labs. You can use Noon tablets. Noon tablets is like an electrolyte tablet that you can add to your water that has electrolytes but no calories. So there's a lot of things out there that we can use, and Noon is N-U-U-N. We don't work with them. It's just I've used that with triathletes and other athletes as well when they're looking for calorie-free options. So there's a lot of things on the market to use in those places, but these are some options for you guys to use for your athletes. And finally, if you guys ever have any questions, as always, tpiatoli@mysportsd.com is my email. Topic 11 is going to be on fueling guidelines for tournaments, really coming up with some principles to teach athletes, or wrestlers specifically, what can they bring to a match. You have multiple matches throughout the day. What kind of food is good for me to kind of keep on hand to make sure that I can refuel and get ready for that next match. As always, be sure to check out mywrestlingnutrition.com. Clint Wattenberg has an incredible ebook on performance nutrition for wrestlers, how to solve the complex nutrition puzzle. This is a great guide for coaches, athletes, and parents, anyone involved that's looking to improve the way they perform using good nutrition. And be sure to check out mysportsdconnect.com. Lots of great information as well, from podcasts to ebooks and a lot of different information. So looking forward to seeing you guys next week in topic 11. Again, the topic will be fueling guidelines for tournaments. As always, thank you guys so much for following and listening. We'll see you soon.